So, welcome everyone to today's webinar, Transforming AI/ML Deployments with DevOps Automation. I'm James Soliday, the Director of Marketing here at DuploCloud, and I will be your moderator today. Today, we're thrilled to have two outstanding speakers. First, we have Zafar Abbas. Zafar leads the engineering team here at DuploCloud, um, and with 2 decades of engineering experience, having previously worked with as the VP of Engineering at Joule Labs and Zenefits, Zafar specializes in building scalable, secure, and software solutions. Joining Zafar, we have Samatir Pandey, a member of the technical staff at Contextual. Samatir focuses on application and infrastructure security and brings extensive experience from his previous roles at Snowflake and the NCC Group. So let's dive into their vast experience. Let's talk today about the agenda. First, we're going to talk why use a DevOps platform and service. And within that, we're going to explore the benefits and the critical hurdles in managing and scaling infrastructure for AI/ML projects. We'll learn how the DevOps platform can streamline operations and enhance efficiency. Next, we're going to talk about the insights from Contextual and discover how to scale AI/ML projects, adapt CI/CD pipelines, and ensure security and compliance, and managing versioning and data. Samatir will share his valuable insights from Contextual. And then lastly, we will start to delve into the future of AI/ML. We'll discuss the emerging technologies in AI/ML and DevOps, how to stay ahead, and how to prepare to support new developments in the field. And Zafar will provide a lot of outlook on what comes next. So without further ado, let's get started on and dive into the exciting world of DevOps and AI/ML.
Thanks, James. Hey guys, I'm Zafar, and I'm going to talk quickly here about ML and DevOps role and so on and so forth. So let's first look at how what value does a DevOps platform and service provides, right? In general to companies, and then we'll narrow down into ML. In general, if you have a dev team who want to launch a product in the cloud, right? We'll make an argument that it takes significant more time and resources to do it solo without a platform and using a platform. So let's take one point at a time, right? If you're using a platform, a platform abstracts complexity of the public cloud. So if you look at GCP, Azure, AWS today, it exposes a lot of configurations and knobs and a lot of ways to do things, right? So as a dev, not knowing much about the public cloud, if you were to approach it and launch an application or launch a service, you are presented with a number of things which could go right or wrong. Like, should you use the right, from user access to provisioning in public versus private subnets to setting the right encryption values, and there's a number of configuration knobs, hundreds of them, which could go right or wrong, right? So that's like one high value for a platform for you to guide in a path where you can deploy not just efficient but secure applications, right? So that's one. Then at the same time, a platform grows based on experience, right? Not just based on the platform features, but all of the other customers that previously have used the platform. So the platform kind of hones in its feature set so that it guides the developer and DevOps experience accordingly, right? And then having that responsibility of making sure the right thing happens underneath kind of offloads the responsibility from application developers and makes it more automated, right? So it kind of allows the teams to focus more on their product and application domain, resulting in faster time to market eventually, right? One of the high value adds that we have in the DuploCloud platform in particular is that we guarantee compliance out of the box. Like if you provision a resource in DuploCloud, we guarantee it to be SOC 2 PCI compliant, right? So that's huge, right? A lot of the provisioning controls that you would expect need to be compliant from the get-go. Like you can't provision a database and expect it to be made compliant later on. You have to set the right configuration knobs and encryption standards and so on and so forth up front, right? So going through a platform layer allows you to set those things up accordingly, precisely, in the right way from the get-go, so that you don't have to repeat any work and waste time afterwards, right? One of the other things is that after you launch your application, there's a huge piece around observability and monitoring and alerting, right? A platform allows you to kind of plug those things and almost reminds you to make sure that those happen rather than those be afterthoughts, right? And then finally, I mean, we take a lot of pride in this at DuploCloud, where we provide a platform and don't walk away. We are there to support it, right? We are there. Our DevOps team is 24/7 online. We make a commitment to every one of our customers that will respond very, very fast on any of the support things, and we are there to support in any way, right? Either new feature development with consultation, or if there's a production incident going on, we hop in. So those points make a really good case of if you want to go approach the public clouds directly and kind of roll out versus going through the platform. We find there's a huge value there, and a lot of our customers agree. Okay, I think that was the point there. Okay. Insights from contextual. So this is where I would think that Samitra can probably chime in about how maybe introduce contextual a bit here, and then to the audience and talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. Hey guys, this is Samitra. I'm a member of technical staff here at Contextual AI. So I'll quickly introduce you to what we do as a company. So we are focused on enterprise AI workflows. We build artificial specialized intelligence models that are tuned for specific enterprise workflows like finance analysts or customer engineering type of things. So we have very specific tuned models that we are creating that are dedicated for these workflows. And our models are end-to-end optimized for retrieval augmented generation, where we can work off of your enterprise data store to retrieve and surface the right kind of data for user queries. And we also have feedback systems built in so that we can tune our models even further and align them to what your customers and your employees are expecting to get as answers from these models. So that's a quick introduction to our product. We do have various product offerings in the enterprise domain, whether it's in your VPC, in our VPC, or on premises. And these are powered by DuploCloud. So we can go ahead to the next slide.
Yep. And before we jump into the pain points of contextual, if anyone has any questions specifically for Samatir, Zafar, or just from the presentation in general, feel free to add this to the chat right now, and we will address it at the end of the at the end during a Q&A session. Samatir, back over to you.
Yeah. So I'll set the stage. When we first engaged with Duplo, we were pretty greenfield. Like our application deployment consisted of someone logging into a VM and just running a service up manually. So we had quite a few requirements for like a mature production grade setup. So we wanted an actual production infrastructure setup where it's not just someone running commands on one VM. We also wanted multiple environments so we can have like a release testing pipeline. We can have other test environments that closely simulate our production environment. So we can have, again, like areas for us to test our product on actual working environments. And CI/CD was also another strong requirement because it really helped us get away from having someone go and manually deploy something to production every time we needed to update a new feature. And from that, we went to having an automated setup for that. And of course, secure by default was a big requirement for us because as Zafar said, with like these cloud configurations, there's like hundreds of things we need to tune specifically because we are using so many different cloud resources, and each of them have like all these knobs and dials that we need to turn to just the right value, or else we end up with an insecure environment. And last of all, as all AI companies are probably facing right now, like there's a huge GPU scarcity in the world. So we had a limited number of GPUs that we can use, and we needed to make the best of those. And so that was a gist of the major pain points that we had while going from running on a VM to having an actual production grade infrastructure setup. And how DevOps platform helped us. So yeah, as I said earlier, so we had like this greenfield waiting for like actual mature practices to come in. and we brought in DuploCloud to help us with that. So we had everything written up as infrastructure as code. We have now 9 Kubernetes deployments for different environments that we have, and each of them are using the same Kubernetes code. All we have to do is go and click deploy on this one for a new environment, and it takes under an hour for us to provision an entire new environment. And we also have continuous integration, continuous deployment for our main production environments. So whenever a PR lands in GitHub, it gets merged and it just gets automatically deployed to our release testing environments, from where we can easily promote it to production. And yeah, since we are now on Kubernetes, we are able to seamlessly scale our resources, because it's as easy as increasing the number of replicas for manual scaling, or just having horizontal pod autoscalers that can be controlled pretty easily based on CPU and memory requirements. And whenever we are ready to go multi-cloud, which is almost an inevitability at this point, because different customers have different requirements. Like someone might come in and say, "Hey, we really just want to work on Azure," and it's super easy for us, because all we have to do is change one configuration value in our environment, which says like, "Oh, deploying from GCP," or switch this to Azure, and we are good to go. For the security and compliance part, like we really didn't even have to think about it, because all we do is provision the resources, and they are secure by default. Like we don't even have to like think about all the knobs that you have to use, because they're already done for us. And being Kubernetes native was a big deal for us, because as an AI ML company, like the landscape is moving so fast, like you have to keep updating your infrastructure, keep updating your resources. Things might change. Uh, as if you've read about retrieval augmented generation, you might know that there's a vector database, and then there's your language models. And over the past 1 year that we have existed, we've already had to change our vector database 3 times, and our language models about 4 to 5 times by now. So being able to have that kind of velocity was really enabled by Kubernetes, where we can just plug in resources and services as needed. And yeah, that has been super helpful for us being successful. And yeah, as I mentioned about GPU scarcity as well, so we had to architect our environment in a way that we could maximize the utilization of the GPUs that we do have. And that was possible only through Kubernetes, where we could make sure that other resources on like the GPU nodes weren't being utilized by pods that didn't need GPUs. So we could have only the GPU using pods on those super rare nodes that we had, and we could maximize the resource utilization for our GPUs.
All right, so before we dive deep a little bit into the contextual architecture, I think let me give you a quick overview into what a general DevOps deployment process looks like in general, right? Not necessarily for AML, but for all applications. And this is kind of through the lens of DuploCloud, right? So we assess, before we go in deployment, on the deployment side of things, we define what the base infrastructure should look like, right? We define the VPC, subnet, make sure that there's any VPN requirements and so on. And then the orchestration is decided whether, and it's based on, the cloud provider and the orchestrator of choice. Like in case of contextual, Kubernetes is an obvious choice, and it's highly scalable and easy to use, and very familiar with the team as well. So we figured out what the components are, what the services look like, what the Kubernetes layout of services would look like. Then we get into definition for what the deployment application provisioning should look like. Oftentimes, the provisioning step goes through a UI layer first, where we use the DuploCloud UI to create service definitions, create databases, create caches, and so on, and deploy that, and kind of make sure that a POC or a dev environment gets running end to end. Once the environment is finalized, we often very quickly convert that into infrastructure as code, like create Terraform definitions of that, right? And then once we are happy with that, we turn that over to the customer to say, hey, can you QA to make sure that end-to-end matches with expectations and so on. So it goes through a rigorous process of QA there. And then once that is done, then we define what the production launch of that application would look like, right? So then, we make sure that the appropriate environments are replicated. Oftentimes we use our own tooling to replicate an existing tenant, what we call in Duplo, to a new one, and then configure it appropriately for production, get it ready, get it tested, and then launch that, right? And then finally getting all the monitoring and logging pieces connected, getting alerting, on-call set up, and so on. Kind of this brings the full circle down to the deployment process. And then finally, not to miss out the whole CI/CD piece that's Sumit mentioned as well. Want to make sure that deployments and updates to the services are completely automated, right? So usually we set up the customers with one push deployment, as in, whenever a commit is made to the appropriate branches, the appropriate workflows in the CI/CD systems are kicked off, and the services get updated in production or a non-production environment for that matter as well. Then finally, at the bottom of the slide, you see a security control section where after you launch in production is where, you start asking questions. What does the security and compliance timelines or milestones look like? Oftentimes companies have specific milestones such as SOC 2, PCI, NIST, and so on and so forth. We have a lot of tool set within the platform as well. We have a SIEM, we have integration, deep integration with the underlying cloud in terms of using their security tool set. We have deep integration with AWS Security Hub. We have deep integration with the GCP Security Command Center. So those tools and controls are utilized during a compliance audit process very, very well. Yeah, so that's a quick summary here. Next slide, let's dive deep into a little bit of what we deployed in case
the architecture.
Contextual. The architecture. This is kind of high-level architecture for what the contextual cloud infra look like. This is a GCP infra, so you might see GCP components here. At the heart of this system, you see a GKE node. This is like we are running in GKE Kubernetes. We have applications running. We have an Istio service mesh. You're using envoy filtering, talking to inference servers. We have an ingress, which is behind our cloud load balancers. We secure it with a WAF, which is also called Cloud Armor in GCP. We have a CI/CD process, like we talked about. We have GitHub Actions triggering the CI/CD, and pretty soon integrating Argo as well in that process. The CI/CD process is pretty automated. The Kubernetes clusters are, and maybe this is what some of you can chime in about the multi-tenant versus single tenant freedom that you have. Like you can customize deployments to a set of customers, versus also dedicate deployments to customers as well. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so a critical part of us having like these repeatable deployments was that we wanted to support multiple deployment models where you can have like customers who have more discerning security requirements. They can have their own dedicated deployment where all of their data is just living in this specific deployment and there's no mixing happening between other customers. And then we also have like the multi-tenant deployment where we'll have multiple customers in that deployment. So we have a couple of different deployment models as well, apart from these two. And yeah, that was a critical need for us to figure out like how we could do multiple environments without it being a major pain point for us.
Okay. And then let's go back here. I want to touch on the selection of the LLMs. I think that's a very key point to discuss as well. Like you can actually dynamically select LLMs based on need, right? You can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so there are so many foundation models out there, and we found that like different foundation models work better for different workflows. And due to that, we had like a pressing need to be able to say, hey, we must be able to spin up like any recent model that we want, and must be able to switch to them as quickly as possible without having to like make major changes in our application. And yeah, so that was enabled with the Istio service mesh, and that's mentioned over here, where we can just spin up a new pod with a new model, and it gets automatic visibility in our application. Our application can go, okay, I see this new model has spun up. Do you want to start using it?
Nice. And I just want to highlight the horizontal and vertical scalability of the system as well, based on need. And we are also using GKE Autopilot here, which is serverless nodes managed by GCP, and it allows, based on the requests of the process of the applications, we can actually really nicely scale up and down. So that's a really good feature of this architecture. Okay, let's keep going.
Yeah, and now we're going to talk into the considerations. So the first one is picking the right cloud provider.
Okay, Samantha, do you wanna talk about what I know you are on GCP? Do you wanna walk us through the process of what led you towards that choice?
Yeah, so it was a multi-step process. Like when we were deciding, like we were in conversations with all three cloud providers, and I think it boiled down to a combination of what we saw in our benchmarks for performance and what kind of pricing they were able to offer us, as well as the number of GPUs they could offer us in the short term. That led to our decision of going for GCP. And I would say in the benchmarks, like it was a close competition between AWS and GCP for us, but in the end, we did go for GCP just because we were getting a higher number of GPUs in a shorter time period at a lower cost, and which was a super important thing for us to get started. I mean, eventually we do see us being public cloud, so I think like the GCP decision right now was more to enable our short-term needs, and eventually we will have a multi-cloud setup. But yeah, I think that was our major decision point. But apart from that, I feel like all cloud providers have pretty similar solutions at this point. And it becomes more of a question of what your company needs at this point in time that would inform your decision of where do you need to go.
And I
Okay.
think the goals with any cloud provider is to do anything once and making sure it kind of aligns with your overall objectives, as well as any decision that you're making for right now, but also 5 years from now. So create, kind of create the most options towards the future. And now we're going to kind of start to dive into the integrating AI ML DevOps challenges. Zafar, do you want to take over the resource management section?
Yeah. I think a lot of this stuff is kind of we touched on already, as in resource management and making sure that we are efficient at that is like a key part of everything we do. And it's even more important in an AI ML workload, like someone just said that the GPU nodes are expensive, and make sure that we are selective about them, and also we scale accordingly. So getting a model set up where we scale up and down appropriately and in real time is important, right? So that's kind of like a foundation. Resource management is a foundation piece there. On the data management side, I think a lot of that is like on the security and privacy front. There's you can definitely set up infrastructure to secure everything by default, but you need to stay on top of if your customer data is meeting all the privacy and security guidelines that especially according to the compliance part that you are shooting for. There are geographic bars as well. Like if you are in Europe, there's GDPR enforcement as well, and I'm sure that contextual once it expands to that point, it will be a very main concern for you. But data management, security, and privacy is kind of super top of mind. Model management and monitoring, I think we just talked about. CI/CD pipelines are there. They are there in like any best practice system. But the way for us to tweak the models and switch the model versions and the types based on our CI/CD pipeline is kind of a super cool thing. So that's a best practice, I would say. I think that the same point applies for the automation piece as well. I think we can go to the next slide. Yeah, I think going to this list, cost management, again, GPUs being expensive, need to stay on top of our utilization. One of the things that the platform allows us to do is create billing dashboards and billing alerts. So that's a piece that is very important as well. And we constantly need to stay on top of making sure that there's no waste. Samhita, do you envision being in a system where you have customers across multiple clouds, or have you thought about that, or your deployment be a multi-cloud deployment?
Yeah, we do envision that being a possibility for sure. Like for larger enterprise customers, like we do see demand for, hey, we want to ensure that, hey, if one cloud provider goes down entirely, we have an entirely same replicated setup in a different cloud provider. So that will eventually be a thing for sure. And even apart from that, there might be customers who just want like different kinds of data being hosted on different clouds. So like even for a single customer, like within a single tenant, we might have like an infrastructure setup that is scaled across multiple clouds at the same time.
Yeah. I really look forward to redrawing that architecture diagram with AWS in there too. That's going to be really cool. Yeah. Um, yeah, continuing on here, performance, it's like constantly on top of it. I think the team is very much aware of making sure that, the time it takes for us to boot these apps is not prohibitively long. We are keeping tabs on that one pretty well as well. And there's a lot of like, maybe something, do you want to talk about the tooling, general ML tooling? What pieces, what apps, what the services do you see come into the picture for you for the next few months?
Um, I'm going to say it's a bit hard to say for the few months because it keeps changing every week for us, depending on like what's happening in like the research landscape. So right now, I think like our focus is like figuring out like the right inference servers, and then that becomes a question of like benchmarking and quickly
Yeah,
identifying
yeah,
like what is working best for customers, what has the least latency, what has the best performance, and even that might be changing like week over week. And yeah, it's
right,
really
right.
hard to say. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's a combination of like your inference serving layer as well as your model layer. Like you might want to be monitoring performance and checking out like the latest and greatest that's dropping pretty much every week now on like,
yeah,
hey, is this
yeah,
better now? Do we need to switch to this? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think the good part is that investing upfront so that you set up the infrastructure so
Mhm.
that you can tune these things with least cost. Like when a
Yeah.
new LLM shows up, it should be no cost for us to just update stuff and make sure the entire pipeline runs, right? So I
Yeah.
think that's the good part. Okay, I think we can go to the next slide.
Mhm.
All right. So James, did you want to talk about the future proofing with compliance stuff here?
I think, yeah, just kind of going into it. I mean, the one of the key considerations we didn't necessarily talk about it, but I think it deserves its own slide. Is that we want to make sure that whatever cloud platform you go with or whatever um, tools you use, you need to take into consideration with the compliance controls. And so, um, we just named PCI, high trust, HIPAA, compliance, and just the sheer amount of controls that kind of goes into it. Um, and the stage, and just an example right here is just the sheer number of security controls um, that are distributed across the stack of DevOps functionality. Um, and this is just kind of an example of the 79 PCI DSS controls. This is just one, two, three, well, four requirements right here of the 79 that you need to abide by to become PCI compliant. So um, especially with AI ML, this becomes a huge thing. Zafar, do you have anything to add to this?
No, I think no, I think that covers it pretty well. I think the general excuse me, the general point here is that investing upfront on secure and compliant infra sets you up to meet these compliance bars over time. And if you look at it after the fact, like if you go to the previous slide, there's like hundreds of compliance controls that you have to meet with each of these, right? And there are companies from all these different categories where, if you're looking for HIPAA, high trust PCI or NIST, there's a plethora of, line items that you have to check off. So getting a head start on this, using a platform approach to things is the right thing to do.
And yeah, I mean, I think this aligns with your previous statement is that you have to align with your long-term goals, um, such as choosing the right cloud provider, um, what cost considerations do you need to take into account? Can you live with what the cost is right now, and can you live what the cost is in the future? Um, you have to kind of look at your existing team. What are their skill sets? How to kind of best integrate. Um, and considering the platforms that are easiest to handle compliance controls. And then lastly, also consider storage and compute options. There's just a ton of considerations that need to go into it. But I think the TLDR of this is that you need to set it up for you need to set it up. You really just need to future-proof your organization.
Agreed.
Um, and then lastly, we want to talk a little bit about the future of AI, ML, and DevOps. Um, so Summitir, what emerging technologies, I'm wondering, do you kind of see on your end?
I think right now, like the biggest changes in the landscape have been around like model providers and inference layers, as I said earlier. So I think like the biggest technological change that might happen in the future is probably going to be some kind of inference server wins in the state-of-the-art landscape out there. I feel right now there is a lot of scope for change in that landscape. So you would have to be ready to adopt that one as soon as the industry figures out, hey, which is the right option for like companies. And that's going to be a big one. And then the other big one is going to be like eventually like one of the large model providers between OpenAI, Anthropic, Cohere, or Meta. One of them is going to be able to get a big win out, and that's going to be a second major thing that we'll need to be prepared for. And also, I mean, there's also going to be a third major thing, which is like your search database is still something that people are figuring out. Hey, what is working best for like AI-based workflows, and that's still an open question too. I'm not even sure how that landscape is going to pan out because it's such a wide open research field right now. Like people used to think like vector databases were the thing, but everyone has agreed now that vector search itself isn't good enough. You need to have both vector search as well as text similarity search. So it's going to be interesting, like figuring out, hey, what's going to work best in our industry, and then you would have to be prepared to like just jump on that bandwagon as soon as possible. Yeah, so it's really a very dynamic landscape out here right now. Like week over week, we have changes, and then probably in 6 months from now, we're going to be looking at a very different system from what we have right now. And it's going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And on the other end of the spectrum, Zafar, like how can I guess how can DevOps kind of account for these rapid these rapid changes with AI?
So there's multiple things there. One is making sure that the services, the core underlying cloud services that power AI ML are available in the platform. That's one. But the second part, which we have kind of pushed more on the contextual team, is enablement, right? Making sure that the infra is ready, like it's there, and on a ton of a dime, we can experiment, we can do A/B testing. And we've learned a ton. I mean, with the contextual team, and I think this use case has kind of prepared us a lot in terms of how to build a good MLOps infrastructure, so that we can make changes much faster, iterate much faster, learn much faster. The whole thing about dynamic pipelines, dynamic inference selection based on pipeline changes was a huge thing. I think that's a use case, that's a blueprint that we can take elsewhere, right? We can write a blog post about that, and so on and so forth as well. So it's like there's a lot of small pieces like that, which I anticipate that we'll continue to learn from. But yeah, I mean, looking forward to kind of keep working together so that we can learn
It's
together.
going to be an exciting few months.
Yeah.